Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Since we're talking about government funding, I would also add a note of sympathy for these Republicans who don't like continuing resolutions and think that the U.S. needs to have a real reckoning over its spending levels, which I think is absolutely true. And I would point to the Congressional Budget Office's latest monthly report, which was out on Tuesday. And it said in the month of August, the U.S. government ran a deficit of $381 billion. That was a single month. And we are on our way now to a second annual $2 trillion deficit. That is what the Congressional Budget Office is now projecting for the full fiscal year that ends on September 30th. And that matches the $2 trillion deficit that was recorded in fiscal 2023. Once you make some adjustments, for example, the student loan cancellation that was then itself canceled by the Supreme Court. And Kate, it is astounding to me that this is not a bigger issue in our presidential campaign. Didn't come up, as far as I can recall, in Tuesday's debate between President Trump and Kamala Harris. But this can't go on. You can't keep spending every year $2 trillion more than you're taking in and expect that nothing bad is going to happen.
Definitely not. I think the question is, how do Republicans pick their battles in these spending fights? I think, to add to your point about how it wasn't a topic in the debate, I mean, the continuing resolution discussion we're having here is over minor adjustments to federal spending, given that so much of federal spending is on autopilot through Social Security and Medicare. The SAVE Act is not a spending issue at all. Usually these showdowns are about the deteriorating fiscal condition of the country. And even Obamacare arguably, had a large fiscal effect on the country and was a fiscal issue and not an unrelated policy writer. So it is concerning that you have a shift away even from that focus on spending in some of these conversations. I do think, though, there are other opportunities, even if there's no political appetite right now to touch Medicare and Social Security. I mean, I would recommend to our listeners an op-ed that Phil Graham wrote for us, talking about how much of federal spending expansion has been through income transfers and the welfare state and mean-tested welfare benefits. Defense spending since 1967 has fallen from about 68% of unobligated general revenue, and it's now down to about 37%. And the inverse of that has been means-tested welfare. Republicans did care about this issue in the spending fight with Kevin McCarthy that Kevin McCarthy negotiated with President Biden when they did that 2-year agreement over the debt ceiling. The GOP managed to negotiate some very modest work requirements on a couple programs like food stamps. And so these are also areas that I would like to see the Republicans focus more on in this spending conversation, because it could be helpful even as you try to build some political appetite for the real fiscal iceberg, which is entitlement spending.
Just to underline that, Social Security and Medicare by themselves, those two programs alone are more than a third of federal outlays, according to this Congressional Budget Office report. And of course, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are completely in agreement that they will never touch, never reform these programs at all, though something is going to have to give. The trustees of Social Security say that by 2033, they are projecting a 21% benefit cut is coming down the pike when the trust fund, quote unquote, runs out of IOUs. And Kim, part of what's important to understand here is as those entitlement programs grow, they put a crunch on everything else that is in the discretionary part of the budget. So to Kate's point about the Republican Party figuring out the best way to pick this battle, if it isn't a charge into a government shutdown over a percentage or two on the continuing resolution that's going to get passed, what would that kind of strategic approach look like for people who are really concerned about these deficits and concerned about the debt, and they realize that spending and not revenue is the problem?
Well, first of all, just on the short-term strategy, one thing I just want to express as frustration is that these guys right now that won't vote for the CR because they say they'll never vote for a CR and we have to finally get serious about spending. They position themselves as heroes in the spending fight and ignore the fact that they are setting up this Republican Congress to end up with another spending blowout in November. Because what's going to happen is they'll disintegrate. That will give Chuck Schumer the whip hand. He will demand a 3-month CR. Republicans will not want to shut down. That means this fight will happen right before Christmas, and the spenders in both parties will lock arms and say, we got to get out of here before it's Christmas break, and we'll give you a little bit more on your domestic spending front, and you guys can have a little bit more for the military, and budgets will go up again, and spending on that discretionary side, and we'll be in an even bigger hole. And what Republicans need to do is kick this to a point at which hopefully they have the House and the Senate and the White House, and then they have to get serious. I mean, fine, if you don't want to talk about Social Security just right now and Medicare just right now, although we must have those discussions. But there are a lot of other, as Kate was talking, welfare programs, means testing. We are still operating at extraordinarily high levels for many of these programs because of the COVID blowout, when there's simply no argument for why those levels should be that high. You could buy yourself some real breathing space by moving the government simply back down to the spending levels that existed prior to this entire COVID mess. The numbers that we are looking at now, and by the way, that was Joe Biden and Democrats' absolute goal when they came charging into office with their American Rescue Plan, etc., which was to permanently ratchet up and keep federal outlays at half again the size of what they were before the COVID outbreak. And simply having a focus on getting that back down would really reset things. Then you might have a little bit more time to dig into some of these bigger programs and figure out how we get on a path for the longer term.
Thank you, Kim and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us your own spending cuts to pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.